There's this phrase some people hear way too often, and it just cuts deep. Go back to your country.
Yeah, it's heavy.
It really is. And today, we wanted to kind of sit with that, explore what that feels like. We've been looking through all this stuff. You've shared articles, research, some really, really personal stories.
Mm.
And we just want to unpack what it tells us about, well, about immigrant life, about figuring out who you are in a new place, especially when you hear things like that.
Yeah. And it's important to remember how sensitive this is, how much emotion is tied up in it for so many people.
Absolutely.
The stories and viewpoints in the material, they're all over the map. You have these really raw accounts of hurt, of discrimination,
Yeah.
and then you also see these very different takes on what it means to belong somewhere or, whether you should criticize the place you live.
Right.
Our goal is just to explore those different viewpoints that came through in everything you sent over.
Okay, so let's start with that phrase itself. Go back to your country. What really jumped out at me was just how often people said they hear it, like constantly.
Some people mentioned hearing it daily. Daily.
It's staggering. And it happens everywhere, right? Different countries, different situations.
Mm-hmm. And the way people describe it, it's always the same feeling. It's hurtful, it's demeaning, it makes you feel less than human.
Totally. You shared those examples like that horrible video with the FedEx driver or even actual signs put up targeting people.
It's awful. And the sources suggest it's often not just, random anger.
What do you mean?
Well, one thing that comes through is that it's often used to just shut down a conversation.
Oh, okay.
Especially, it seems, when someone who's seen as an immigrant or, foreign dares to criticize something about the country they're in.
Right. Even if they live there legally, pay taxes, work hard.
Exactly. It's like their right to even have an opinion is questioned. The phrase is basically a way to say, you don't belong here, so your voice doesn't matter. Silence dissent.
Wow. And when you read those personal stories, the emotional impact,
Yeah.
you can really feel it.
Oh, definitely.
People talk about being annoyed, sure, but mostly just hurt, deeply hurt.
Yeah.
It's like this constant nagging reminder that no matter how long you've been somewhere or what you contribute.
You're still seen as an outsider.
Exactly. Not one of us. It creates this feeling of always being on the edge, never quite belonging, even in the place you call home.
It sounds exhausting. And, one perspective that came up in the sources was interesting. It
Yeah.
sort of suggested that maybe saying that phrase comes from a certain lack of understanding, maybe from people who haven't really lived outside their own bubble, their own country, or even their state.
Okay, I think I see where you're going.
The idea being they might not really grasp how incredibly hard it is to pick up your whole life, family, friends, culture, everything, and start over somewhere completely new.
Right. It's a massive thing to do.
It really is. And so just dismissing that whole journey with a casual go back, the sources kind of frame it as showing a lack of empathy, maybe even a bit of immaturity.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And it often seems linked, especially in the U.S.-focused sources, with speak English.
Oh, yeah. Speak English. This is America.
It feels like another way of saying you don't fit in.
Totally. And there's that double standard, right? Someone speaking their own language with their family is seen as a problem.
But, like the sources pointed out, if two Americans met randomly in, say, Russia, they'd speak English together, wouldn't they?
Of course.
It's presented as just as natural for others to use their mother tongue in private conversations.
Exactly. And what's really worrying, according to some of the material, is when this kind of talk doesn't just come from strangers on the street.
You mean like from people in positions of power?
Yeah. When politicians say things like this, it feels different, heavier. The sources suggest it's seen as much more disturbing and that those figures should be held to a higher standard.
I can see that. It normalizes it in a
Right.
way. There was also a really strong theme about the pressure to just blend in, assimilate.
Huge pressure.
People described feeling like they had to change everything, the way they dressed, how they talked, even what they were interested in, just to try and fit.
Shedding parts of yourself.
Yeah. Sometimes sacrificing really important parts of their own culture, their heritage. We saw those stories about people changing their
You
names.
sound more American or Western.
Or hiding the food they brought for lunch because other kids made fun of the smell.
Oh, that's heartbreaking. Internalizing shame about something that should be a source of pride or comfort.
It really is. And then there was this other layer, which was really quite nuanced.
What was that?
Sometimes, the sources said, the toughest experiences even bullying about identity can actually come from within your own broader community.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, there was discussion around, for example, interactions between African Americans and recent immigrants from the Caribbean or Africa.
Okay.
And the point made was that sometimes what looks like one group feeling superior is actually underneath this really fierce pride. Pride.
Yeah, pride in their specific culture, their history, maybe things they or their families built from scratch, often against huge odds. It's not simple. It's complex, this negotiation of identity even within larger groups.
That adds another whole dimension. And the experience is shared by the Asian community. Just devastating.
Really tough to read.
You had stories of cars being vandalized with racist slurs about COVID.
Physical attacks, vandalism at temples, attacks on elderly people, even people just walking with their kids.
Yeah. And the sources drew this line, this connection between the recent rise in attacks and a much longer history of discrimination,
Right, like the example of Chinese laborers building the railroads.
while facing head taxes and laws designed to keep them out.
Yeah. So this current wave of hate, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It taps into something old and ugly.
And it creates this climate of fear. People literally afraid to go outside, especially after dark.
You can understand why. And the sources really frame these incidents not as isolated events, but as part of that bigger pattern. Racism, dehumanization. The terrible shootings in Atlanta were mentioned as a sort of horrific culmination of all that.
Right.
And the material highlighted the specific dangers faced by Asian women, how objectification mixes with racism and sexism to put them at particular risk. It's just layer upon layer.
It really is. Now, we should probably also touch on the other side presented in some sources.
Okay.
The perspective that tries to explain, maybe even defend, telling someone to go back.
Right. The argument often goes something like, if you chose to come here, to this country.
Let's say the U.S., for example, as some sources focused on that.
Okay, if you chose to come to the U.S. and then you spend all your time criticizing it or saying you want to change it to be just like the country you left,
Then maybe you should go back if you don't like it here.
that's the gist of the argument presented in those sources. It's framed as a kind of logical response to perceived ingratitude or constant complaint.
And tied into that often is the idea of America being the freest country.
Yeah, that came up. The argument is, look, freedom isn't always neat and tidy. People will disagree about things.
Politics, society, whatever.
Right. But the fundamental freedom here gives you options. And then the question gets asked. People are supposedly desperate to get in, so if other places are so much better, why aren't huge numbers immigrating there instead?
It's like a challenge. If you dislike it so much, why stay, given the choice you made to come?
Exactly. It questions the validity of deep criticism when you chose to be here in a place seen as uniquely free.
But there's a really crucial point made in one source about who that argument doesn't apply to.
Who's that?
African Americans.
Ah, right. Because the history is completely different.
Completely. The source makes it clear. Their ancestors didn't choose to come here. They were forcibly brought, ripped away from their homes by slavery.
So that whole if you don't like it, leave logic, it just doesn't land the same way at all. You can't equate voluntary immigration with the legacy of slavery.
Exactly. And other sources push back really hard against the whole idea that criticism means you should leave.
How so?
They argue that people who love the country, who chose it, who are legal residents, paying taxes, contributing.
Building lives, businesses, families.
Yes.
Yeah.
That they absolutely have the right to speak up about things they think need fixing, just like anyone else born there.
It's part of being an engaged resident or citizen, isn't it?
That's the point they make. So telling them to go back isn't a real argument. It's just a way to shut them down. Unfairly, maybe, as mentioned earlier, even immaturely.
Just ending the conversation because you don't like what you're hearing.
Pretty much. The one source did make a distinction.
Okay.
It acknowledged that, yes, there might be some individuals who come with real hostility, who maybe do want to cause harm.
That's a different
A
situation.
very different situation, the source argued. But the main issue, the source of all this hurt we're talking about, is when go back is thrown at people who are just offering genuine criticism or sharing their valid concerns, not people filled with hate.
Yeah, that distinction feels important. But even with all these challenges, the sources also talk about finding ways to belong anyway, about resilience.
They do. There's this real sense of an internal struggle sometimes, that pressure to fit in versus wanting, needing to hold on to your own culture.
The tension.
Yeah. And the advice that comes through loud and clear is hold on to your culture. Be proud of it. Don't let anyone make you ashamed of who you are or where you come from.
That's powerful. That phrase mentioned from Chinese.
Stop hatred, respect, tolerance. Yeah, it captures that spirit.
And it's good to remember, too, that many sources highlighted the
Oh,
positives.
definitely. Lots of gratitude expressed for the many, many people who are welcoming, who do see the value immigrants bring.
The knowledge, the different perspectives, the cultural richness, the boost to the economy.
All of it. It's not all negative experiences, not by a long shot. The sources make that clear, too.
And that theme of just keeping going, perseverance.
Yes. Especially around that book, the
Yeah.
one literally titled, Go Back to Your Country.
Written by someone who heard it all the time.
Right. And the stories associated with it were about overcoming huge struggles, fighting through achieving things anyway.
Finding strength even when people are trying to push you down.
Yeah.
Resilience.
Exactly. It really comes down to the power of community, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And finding your voice, not being afraid to stand up against hate.
Finding strength in who you are and with others who get it.
Yeah. So when we kind of step back and look at all this,
Mm-hmm.
we've seen the real pain caused by telling someone to go back,
Mm-hmm.
how it tries to silence people,
Mm-hmm. And that conflict between wanting to fit in and needing to stay true to yourself.
and the very different ideas about who gets to criticize and why.
Right. But also those strong threads of finding belonging, making contributions, and just persevering. It's all in there.
It really is.
And connecting this back to you, listening, maybe just holding on to these different experiences and viewpoints is important.
Yeah.
Understanding the hurt, the reasons people give, the ways people cope.
Yeah.
It helps us talk about all this stuff, immigration, identity, with a bit more, I don't know, empathy, more understanding.
Definitely. It's certainly not simple.
Not at all.
Which leaves us with something to maybe think about after this.
Okay.
Given everything we've heard from these sources, all the different feelings, the arguments, the histories, what does it actually mean to belong somewhere? Truly belong? And maybe what's the responsibility we all have, no matter how we got here or where our families came from, to engage with the place we live constructively, to build something together?
That's a big question.
It is something to chew on.